acclimative just in time. Okay, so this week we're going to do essay writing. So, what is an essay? You give me your definition of an essay. Just so that we're all on the same page. In the chat, anyone know what an essay is? Or when we might write an essay? Everyone knows what an essay is? Can anyone hear me? You and Anna can't hear me? So, an essay is effectively an argument. You're kind of arguing with yourself, trying to convince yourself of something. A report is different. A report we'll cover either next week or the week after. A report is presenting information in a logical way. An essay is a logical argument for or against, or a bit of both. That's all. Essays are more the realm of English, humanities, whereas the sciences, maths, engineering tend to use reports because you're not really trying to argue something. You're just presenting something as facts. So, essay writing is never my strong suit at uni, in high school. So, why do we write? Let me start this again. When would it be inappropriate to write an essay on a topic? What are we trying to do? I think I just said it then. So, is he saying prove a point? So, to make a statement and then argue for it or argue against it. So the typical senior English exam is using a book like Macbeth. You would then have to argue for or against if one of the characters, I can't remember the exact question now, but one of the characters is a good person or a bad person. You have to use the book as your reference point to argue for or against. So let's stick with the conspiracy theory stuff. My argument is that 5G is the reason that coronavirus exists. I would argue that it is causing it. I might argue against it, but it's more than just a presentation of information. If all I wanted to do was present information based on a topic, then I would use a report. An essay is an argument. There is specifically an argumentative essay, but usually presenting one side or another, for or against. Again, we write about anything. Helping a uni student with their first essay at the moment, and they're arguing that whether or not we should use Wikipedia as a reference. Next week we'll probably do referencing, so this is a good point. So when we're talking about essays and what we would do here, we're going to argue that students should not use Wikipedia as a reference point. We all agree on that from last time. So we will be arguing we'll be arguing against Wikipedia being used as a reference in your academic assignments. So if you're going to write an essay, take 2 minutes, how would you structure it? Let's use the exact example of, we're arguing that students should not use Wikipedia as a reference. So how would you structure your essay from top to bottom, beginning to end? Remember that when we're looking at academic writing, we need a logical flow of ideas and information. Oh, yeah. So what would you start with? What would you put in the middle? Don't get too specific, just a general overview. So we have the teal structure. So we have the introduction first, body paragraphs, and then a conclusion. So remember that logical flow of ideas. What? Anything else? Just those three. So what's the first line of our essay? So the first paragraph is the introduction. So we have 5G is causing coronavirus. What should the introduction tell the reader? What are the main things the introduction needs to tell the person that's reading it? Yeah, so you and Anna have said topic sentence, what you're writing about, your perspective, for or against. You have to make what's called a thesis statement. So what are you arguing for or against? Yep, so Kelly says your side of the argument. So all pretty well saying the same thing. You're all in agreement there? This is much about me teaching and explaining as you guys are collaborating with me and adapting your understanding. And it should tell me exactly what I'm about to read. It shouldn't tell me things that you're not going to write about. Remember, again, back to the academic writing, everything has to be relevant. Everything in your introduction has to be relevant. If I'm talking about 5G causing coronavirus, I can't even say what's true. Then, if I go on writing about infection rates in Japan in March, it's not really on topic at all in the slides. And all it will do is eat into your word count. So how many body paragraphs should we have? So take you should have as many paragraphs as you have arguments, topics. So if you shouldn't have more than 2 or 3 arguments or topics. You should be able to argue for something using 3. paragraphs, maybe 4. So we think back to the question that we're asking, or not necessarily the question, but the thesis statement. So we should, or the question could be, should students use Wikipedia as a reference source? The answer is obviously no. So that is our question. Should students use Wikipedia as a reference source? No, they shouldn't, is our statement. And this is where it's a bit different than a report. A report is simply usually showing information, showing that you found the information and you can compare it to something else. If we were looking at students using Wikipedia as a reference source, I would need to show my understanding that I know what a quality source is. I know why Wikipedia shouldn't be used. So they'd be 2 of my. So why isn't Wikipedia a valid reference? What is a valid reference? And then you're applying what is a valid reference again to why Wikipedia isn't. So you're not only showing you can go and find the information and presenting, but you're arguing with the information. That requires a higher level of understanding. Again, can we just come out and say things as non-experts? So no, we can't. So we still have to reference, and I'll go over referencing in great, painfully boring detail next week. So we still have to reference. People make the mistake in their body paragraphs where they just stick as many references in there as they possibly can, but they don't actually create an argument. So that's usually where people get tripped up. And the conclusion is where everybody loses marks. Who struggles to write a conclusion? I don't think I've ever written a conclusion and gone, you know what, that's exactly what I wanted to write. I've sat there, gone over it, and banged my head against the desk for hours, trying to summarize what I wrote. All you have to do is restate your answer to your question. So you take what you wrote in the introduction, you change it, and you restate it in your conclusion. You do not introduce any new information. That is blasphemy for a conclusion. You do not introduce any information that was not in your introduction or your body paragraphs. And then you re-summarize your body paragraphs based around the answer to your question. So you just, introductions, 100 words, depending on your teacher and depending on your son. 100 words is good because you have to be succinct. And this, so if I was going to say, if I was writing this essay, I would say, as my final statement, something like, if Wikipedia was to introduce stricter standards in their editing, then one day they may become a valid referencing source. The end. That's your final paragraph. You're making a recommendation or a, what's the word, oh man, a prediction about what may happen in the future. It still has to be based off, sorry, it still has to be based off your initial question you're kind of opening the door, I guess, for what's to come. And that's where people really struggle, is that last statement, the last sentence or two. And they don't restate the question. And then they try to make new arguments, and it basically just becomes another body paragraph, and you don't really have a conclusion. So, laying out the body paragraphs. If you were going to argue that Wikipedia should or should not be used, what would you write about in a logical flow? Just off the top of your head, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. So, anyone can say whatever they want. Wikipedia have no accountability over what's published. And what else could we say? And although it's moderated, someone could read something on there and it had just been changed without being checked. And all of a sudden, someone's got the wrong information. So the idea here is that we lay everything out in the most logical order. So we would talk about what does make a good reference source first. You can't come in and slam Wikipedia for being bad reference source if you don't explain what a good reference source is. So it's kind of playing both sides a little bit. So you say that Wikipedia, a good reference source, has all the things we talked about last week. There is a reason that I do this in this order. And we end up with a logical flow of ideas. What is a good reference source? Why is Wikipedia not a good reference source? Why is using it bad? And why using another source is better? It has to be a logical flow. If I wanted to, I can't remember what I was going to say now. But again, it's that logical flow of information. Don't start talking about the second thing until you finish talking about the first thing. And by thing, I mean your argument. Topic sentence. What does this tell us? What should it tell you? So Ewan said, don't talk about two different things in one paragraph. Very good. Anna, sorry Anna, didn't want to give you the credit. So what does the topic sentence tell us? What's the topic sentence of a paragraph tell us about the paragraph? So Kelly says what it's about. And it's exactly right. Don't waffle on in a topic sentence. I should be able to read that topic sentence and know exactly what's about to come. If you're talking about Wikipedia as a reference source, don't start talking about car batteries. I know that's a ridiculous example, but you have to state, if you write it in the topic sentence, it has to come next in that paragraph. If you want to come to a new topic, new paragraph, new topic sentence. So the supporting sentences come next. So you make a point, then you have to reference and find sources to back yourself up. So I would say, well, people that reference Wikipedia get lower grades. I can say whatever I want, can't I? But in order for it to be academic, I need to find references to support my argument. So you develop the idea, and then you find sources of information that agree with you. And then we get to, so we then get into the evidence, which is more. So then we use examples. Examples are really, really good. Being able to explain something and use an example to prove your point is showing you have a very high understanding. Just explaining something doesn't mean you have any grasp on it. You might just know how to explain it, but knowing how it applies in the real world is up there with knowledge levels. So, the analysis. So this is where, again, all well and good to find all this great evidence, but what does that evidence mean for your argument? So what is the significance of that evidence? This evidence proves that Wikipedia should not be used as a reference source, or that students perform better when they don't use Wikipedia. You have to link your evidence back to your question or your statement. Does that make sense? Everything has to get linked back to that question. The entire essay is about that question. And you'll notice when a student writes an assignment, especially last minute in an essay, by the time they get to the bottom, the last paragraph, they are so far away from answering the question. Even if it's written really well, it doesn't mean much. So everything you write has to be linked back. At the end of every paragraph, it gets linked. There's a linking sentence at the bottom and an analysis. So you analyze what that means with regards to the question. Then we have the concluding sentence. So, who has trouble linking? Or write something like, in the next paragraph we will talk about. So Kelly says, yep. And it's a really hard skill. So you have to use in this. Let's say I'm just talking about what is a good reference source. This is my first paragraph. And I've talked about what is a good reference. This last sentence is restating the point. And then I could write something like, student performance is often reflected in their referencing. So the end of this paragraph is telling me what the next paragraph will be about. It doesn't go into too much detail, but you see how it links? And it's not just like reading introduction, body paragraph 1, stop. Body paragraph 2, stop. Body paragraph 3. It needs to be that logical flow. And you need to have like a segue between the body paragraphs. So I was not very good at writing essays in high school. And like first and second year uni, so. I have a very scientific mind. I don't really care about opinions when it comes to much. Someone's opinion on something doesn't mean a lot in the scientific world. It's all about presenting data and graphs. And I'm really, really good at writing reports, but writing a structured argument wasn't the easiest thing for me. Anybody else find that? You can find the information, you understand it, but writing a cohesive argument, you can sometimes struggle with. Izzy says 100% me. So it usually means you're more scientific about it. anything else. And this is more about beforehand. Think about a cohesive argument and then have a look if you can answer it. Come up with something in your mind, then go and read about it. If it's going to be really hard to argue that point, do something else. The amount of people that get halfway through an essay and go, this isn't going to work, but I'm halfway through, so I'm going to stubbornly go through anyway. Don't do that. If you're struggling in the first to find evidence, to find an argument, you can start again with a different question. Who's done that before? Go halfway through, realize that what they're arguing for isn't correct, or you can't find evidence for it, and then you just have to make stuff up at the end to get the word out. Who's done that? Yeah. So, proper preparation prevents poor performance. I'm not going to say what one of those P's is actually. I'll get in trouble. Proper preparation is key. Where do we start? I go, my whiteboard is full of crazy ideas. Start there, start on a piece of paper. Pick something that you're interested in. It's so much easier to write something that you're interested in. Obviously, sometimes you don't get that choice being in school. And pick an argument that you can back up. There's no point trying to argue for something. But people get emotionally invested in these arguments, and then it never works well. So the sources. You write the body paragraph, then you conclude your argument. Sorry. What are you trying to answer? What are you trying to argue? And stay on topic. Who's just wafted on because they couldn't fit the word limit and then lost marks for wafting on? So you talk about things that are irrelevant because they're easy, because you've done it last minute, you're rushed, you haven't planned. Yeah. And it's really obvious when someone does that, because they write loads about one thing. One argument does not answer the question. So everything you do should be trying to answer the question. So when do we write the introduction and the conclusion? Order. So should you write your conclusion, your introduction, before you've written your 3 paragraphs? Or should you write your 3 paragraphs and then write about them in the introduction? It's really obvious when somebody writes their introduction and then they write 3 completely different paragraphs that the introduction doesn't say anything about. So, paragraph first. Because the introduction is telling you what is to come in those 3 paragraphs. Most people write it first and then they don't write 3 paragraphs that they wrote about in their introduction. Then the conclusion after the introduction. Okay. Sorry, I'm old. Getting tired. So, signposts that transition from topic to topic. What are we talking about here? So all we're doing is moving on from the old information. Sorry. So we're stating how the next paragraph links to this one and what's about to come in the next paragraph. It tells the person that the next paragraph is going to be about something different. And that's some self-directed learning, is to learn how to do this signposting so that the reader knows a change in topic is coming. And it's not just chunk of information, chunk of information, chunk of information. It's really painful to read things that are just chunks of information. Can I copy and paste something someone else has written? And we'll go through this next week. But can I just copy and paste? Well, the answer is yes. You can copy and paste what someone's written if it supports your argument and you reference it properly. But what doesn't copy and pasting information show? Does it show you understand something, or does it show you can copy and paste? So you have to be really careful about using direct quotes. So Izzy says it doesn't show your thoughts. Exactly. So you need to be careful. They also don't count towards your word count. Always, use in-text referencing where possible. Okay. My biggest gripe at the moment is people using laptops to do exams study with. Because I'm old. You learn, especially the sciences, because what do you have to do your exams in? Pen and paper. I find if I'm looking at something on the screen, I don't take all of the information. So the same comes when you're looking at your draft. If you've been looking at your draft on the computer screen for the past, let's say 5-6 hours, you're going to see it differently when it's printed on paper. I know that sounds silly, but a red pen and your draft printed out is your best weapon for picking apart your draft yourself. Not great for the environment, but you know, got to get those marks. Once you've done that, shred it. No, don't do that. Put it aside. Who's written an assignment and the night is 2 o'clock in the morning and you are thinking, this is the greatest thing I have ever written? Then you wake up the next day and read it and go, what the heck is this? Anyone done that? I just do it all the time. Yes. Time away from what you're writing or doing is the... People often think, if I just sit here for the next 18 hours and get this done, I'll get the best mark. It's never, ever the case. So, scribble all over it. Pick out all your spelling mistakes, all your grammar mistakes, circles, arrows, whatever, and then put it aside for 24 hours. But this requires preparation, so you can't be doing this tonight. Who's the night before kind of person? You can do the bulk of your assignment the night before. All of this planning stuff, if you do it in the weeks leading up to it, it's so much easier. And I can't really talk because I used to do my assignments the day of or the night before. So we'll go over referencing next week. But it's important to, for the reasons we've discussed this week and last week, that you reference things. But we'll go more through that next week. So we know why we reference. We can copy and paste, but it doesn't show any understanding of it. How many references do you think for, say, a 1,000-word essay? So you said about 20. For a report, yes, I would say about 20. For an essay, you don't need the same bulk of references because it is simple. There's maybe need one reference to back up each of your statements. 1 or 2 for the introduction. I guess it depends on the essay, but when you use too many references, it's bad. It's as bad as using not enough. Because you're trying to display too much information without really making an argument. So it's about being smart with your words. If you've only got 1,000 words doesn't last very long. Do we know about the different styles of referencing? So Harvard, APA, Vancouver, loads of different styles. Your teacher will tell you which style they want you to use. And you have to use that one because they are different. And if you use Harvard and they're marking it based on APA, or APA and they're basing it on Harvard, then you can't go the reference. So get someone else to read it. So when you're doing the first edit, like when you finished it and you think it's the greatest thing in the universe, get someone else to read it. Print it out. Don't actually sleep on your assignment. Don't change anything, don't hand anything in, and get a decent night's sleep and then look at it again. So, things to look for when you're editing. Have I answered the question? If you haven't answered the question and you've just displayed a load of references and information, then you've just basically written a report. So you haven't really written an essay. Have you explored both sides of the argument? So some teachers will say, yes, a little bit in an essay. There's an argumentative essay, which is purely based on both sides. If you're just writing a regular essay and you're trying to answer your question, avoid arguing with yourself too much. Is it in the correct structure? Is your introduction the first paragraph? So when I'm reading through the paragraphs, do I know what I'm reading about? Is it clear what the topic is of this paragraph? If it's not, then you need to change it. Why is spelling and punctuation important? Think of your academic writing. Why is it important to have correct spelling and punctuation and grammar? Because it looks professional. It looks like it's an academic piece. And yeah, if you're using the correct grammar and spelling, it will be clear and concise. Does your argument make sense? Are you following the same argument through your paragraphs? Again, if you're arguing a point or trying to answer a question, so Yes, you did spell professional role, ironically enough. So, is the evidence relevant? And does it support your argument? The classic one is somebody makes an argument, they don't do the referencing properly, they find something random on the internet, and it actually goes against what they're saying. And again, that's really obvious one. So make sure all the references you use actually say what you think they do. So have all the references been done in text? And we'll go over that in more detail next week. Okay. Who's used Turnitin before? So it's more of a senior school thing, although Kelly says she's never had it. Damon has. So it's a plagiarism checker. So you submit your draft or your final assignment to this plagiarism checker and it spits out a score. People get freaked out when they get a high score. Should really be using it by at least grade 11, if not grade 10. Teachers are being slapped. Turnitin is a plagiarism check. So if you don't reference properly or you try to copy paste direct quotes, Turnitin will pick it up in a second. It is matched to absolutely everything that's published on the internet. And absolutely every assignment that's ever been handed in. So any institution that uses Turnitin. Damon, what was your score? Your matching score? So it basically, if you get too high a matching score, then it's likely that you've plagiarized information. But it depends, it's case dependent. And it used to be only a thing with universities, but now they're bringing it into high school, which is really good. Anything under 20%, gold. 20 to 40%, you're playing with fire. Anything over 50% will get you an appointment with the head of department. So it matches up how much you've plagiarized. Over a certain score, say over 40%, and yeah, it'll get looked at. But as long as you reference properly and you don't plagiarize, then you should be fine. Okay. Any questions regarding essay writing? That's good, because I don't have many answers.